So, we're going to talk today about automating server configuration with Ansible. Has anyone heard of Ansible at all? Okay, that's pretty impressive. If you haven't, it's going to blow your mind. If you have heard of it, chances are you know more about it than I do. So all questions will be directed to everyone else. I'm the code boss on Twitter. I work for a company called Clevyr. We're a consulting shop here in town about a mile up the road. We do software engineering, web development, any tech stuff that your company needs, we do. We created a new company about 6 months ago called Clevyr Labs. We build virtual reality applications, augmented reality applications. We've got a few in the app stores for phones right now. We're messing with HTC Vive right now. It's a lot of cool stuff. If you have any questions about that or want to see a cool demo of our business cards, which have AR built in, find me after this. It's pretty cool. So let's get into it. So Ansible is a really fun tool. We're not going to do any Python coding today. Why would I be talking about Ansible at a Python group? And if you can answer that, then you get a cool Clevyr Labs shirt.
It's written in Python.
Do you have a shirt already, Mike? All right. It is written in Python. It's a really phenomenal tool. There are other tools like it called Chef and Puppet. I'm not sure which ones came first, but Ansible's kind of grown to be the most used one. It's got a ridiculous amount of stars on GitHub, and it's a phenomenal tool. So there's a logo. So what does it do? Ansible does a lot of things. It automates everything related to server management. So anything that you can do with a command line manually, you can tell Ansible to do for you. You can script it up. So that means installing libraries, securing servers, managing users, stopping, starting services, deployments, literally anything that you yourself can do with a command line, which is anything on a server. So what do you need to use Ansible? Well, you have to have a server that's actually running right now. It's not going to spin up a server for you. You need Python on that server because Ansible uses Python. So Python's got to be installed wherever you plan to use it. And you need access to that server. That can be just some account on that server. You can authenticate with it with SSH is the default way, or you can do password. We'll see this in a demo, which we're about to do now. So the initial way that we're going to use Ansible, I'm just going to use on the command line, is I'm going to run a command. And Ansible breaks things down into modules. So we're going to use the ping module here. And this is going to fail. And that's because the default server I'm trying to hit, I've blocked root from being able to have SSH access right now, just to show this. And you can see that. So. But before I get to making it working, how does Ansible actually know to hit this server? That's 17. Where's my mouse? It's up here. That 172.168.32. By default, if you just use Ansible on the command line, it's going to look at etc Ansible hosts. This is what's called an inventory file in Ansible. It tells you where you want, what nodes you want to be pointing to. This is a simple INI file, just a config file, even though it doesn't have the INI extension. So you can put this in a group. If you wanted to have like a group of development servers, a group of production servers, we'll see all that in a second. But that's how it knows what nodes I'm trying to hit. So the reason this fails is because my default, the only user that I'm giving access to right now is a user called Vagrant on this server. And this server is not anywhere externally. It's just running on VirtualBox right here. It's this thing right here that we're connecting to. So we're going to ping this, and no, I need to put a -m there because that's the right syntax. Nope, that's not it either. I put the that is it. Okay. So what we're telling Ansible to do here, and boom, success. It pinged our server, it returned with Pong. All, by the way, is just a way to say you want every server in that inventory file. If I had grouped it in development, I could say development, for example. -u is the user I'm trying to authenticate as. I've got SSH already set up. My SSH key is on that server, so I didn't have to provide a password or anything. This is a little intro into Ansible. I could run this, I could ping, I've only got one server right there, but I could just add another server into that inventory file, and bam, I'm now running commands on multiple servers. So ping is a module that Ansible supports. There's a ton of modules that pretty much anything you can do on a command line, create a file, install a library, there's Ansible modules for that. This is a little intro into Ansible, but this is not the normal way you would use it. The way you would use Ansible that is very powerful is you would create what's called a playbook. And both Chef and Puppet, for example, do this too. But we're going to look at kind of a playbook structure that I've got here. And we're going to actually do some stuff on this server here that's running, more so than just pinging it. So the way we're going to run this playbook is this is our YAML file. Everything in Ansible is YAML, so we don't need any Python at all. And I know this is going to look messy, but this is literally the whole file. It's BAM. It's right there. So the way we're going to run this playbook file, I'm not going to run it yet, but just to show you the syntax, it's let's clear that. It's Ansible Playbook. Whenever you install Ansible, you get a few Ansible commands, so we get Ansible Playbook. We're going to specify the inventory file that's local. I'm pointing it right here. So you can kind of see I'm grouping it in development here. Again, just same stuff you can do with an INI file. And then we're going to point it to our playbook file. And this is how we would run the playbook file. Let's go through it a little bit so you can see what it's doing first. So we've got just our name of our playbook file. We're telling it that we want to run it on every single host. This right here, by default, Ansible will run as the root user, which it expects you to have an SSH key set up. I'm not doing that right now. I'm using a sub-user, which you can see right here. This is pointing to a variable. By default, Ansible is going to look at variables in this all file here, again, because it's going to look at all, because that's going to just reference every single. I could name these as development. I could name these as other groups, but all will just be, it's a global variable, more or less. You can see I've got a user here called Vagrant. Right now, I'm promoting myself to root once I'm already attached to the server. So that's what all this nonsense is here. Ansible playbooks breaks things down into tasks, and those tasks run individual modules. So as soon as I run this playbook, it's going to go through this task file here, and this is an example. One of the things that I love using Ansible for is automating server security. The things that I don't normally do when I start up a server, if I'm just doing it manually, I can just script it all with Ansible and get that all free out of the box, and I only have to do it once. So one common thing that is ideal to do on a server is to disable password authentication. You want to just limit it to SSH, ideally only. There's some circumstances where that's not where you can't do that, but in an ideal world, you're only logging into a server with SSH. So we're actually telling it, there's a module here called line and file. We're telling it to modify this file, the SSH deconfig. We're going to find the line that starts with password authentication. We're going to set the line to password authentication no, and then we're setting the state to present. That just means that Ansible is supposed to persist this in the file. And these are all parameters to the line and file module. And after that, we have this notify property here. What that's telling Ansible is that we're going to run this restart SSH handler, which is right down here, and we're just going to tell it to restart SSH. So we got another module here. Service is a module. These are just Ansible modules. We're telling it that we want to restart SSH. We want to set it to a restarted state. You can imagine we've only got one task here and one handler. This gets pretty big pretty quick. So another way you can do this with Ansible is you can break things out into roles. So I've got a whole role here called nginx, and what that's going to do, by default, Ansible is going to look in the roles directory. I've got a directory in there called nginx, and it's going to look for the tasks in here. So this is a nice way to split it up. So I've just got a simple role here that's just going to install nginx and copy over just a default conf file. The templates directory here is actually, it's a way for you to be able to move to SCP files over from your local directory to Ansible. Just a fun thing. It's kind of neat to see how Ansible has solved problems for you. So this is one of the ways that you can automate kind of SCPing things. And that's all we've got here. Let's run this. And so far, our server, I've just got nginx running on it right now. So it does have nginx. And we're going to try to install nginx again. So let's see what happens when we do that. So we're going to run this command. So Ansible's running. Again, before this ran, so we can see some things were okay and some things were changed. Before this ran, Python had to be on the server. The server had to be up and running, and I had to be able to connect with my Vagrant user with SSH. Those all things had to happen. It just said okay when I tried to install nginx because it was already running. It's not going to reinstall nginx if it's already there. Down here, though, disallowing password authentication, that actually changed. That was something that was not there. And if I run this again, you're going to see it's just going to say okay for everything. It's not even going to restart SSH because nothing changed. So Ansible is not, you can run the same playbook multiple times and it's not going to run the same commands every time. It's going to actually intelligently check to make sure that it needs to run this task before it actually does it. So I meant to show this beforehand, but if I SSH with my Vagrant user, I'm connected with SSH, so I'm fine to get in on that. I'm attached to this server now. Let me exit that. Root, on the other hand, I'm doing everything backwards here, but I just, as a demo, I wanted to show that Right now, I'm only logging into root with the password, and it's going to block me from doing that because it's telling me I'm not allowing password authentication. Before I ran the Ansible playbook, I would have been able to log in with root. So the last thing I wanted to show here is just kind of going more on the security side. I have a couple tasks commented out here, and this is UFW, which I want to say it's in for Unix firewall. It's U something firewall. Feel free to correct me if anyone knows, but it's the default firewall that you get with Ubuntu. Probably other systems too. And this was the last big thing. But what I want to do is I want to pretty much block every port, which right now we're not blocking port 80 because you're obviously seeing a website here. If I run this, we're gonna set up UFW, the firewall. We're gonna have it deny every single port, but then we're gonna run a separate task to allow the SSH port, which again, it's a variable here. The default SSH port is 22, so we're just setting it to that right here. But if let me save that. So now we uncommented those two tasks. This will be the last big thing. Let me rerun this playbook. It's going to configure UFW. So we set up UFW. That changed. We're allowing SSH traffic, which means I can still connect with my Vagrant user, and bam, I can. So we're not blocking port 22. But if I refresh this page, we should no longer, well, that should have worked. It worked an hour ago. I may need to restart something, but we should be blocking every port now except for SSH. Port 80 is being sneaky. That's okay though. You get the gist. Hopping back to the presentation, that's kind of what Ansible can do. But let's say you wanted to take it even further, and I promise this is going to be the last 30 seconds. You want to automate everything, like code the server, you want to code your actual spinning up of the server, you want to code your initial user with access, you want to create the operating system itself, like you want to say you want Ubuntu versus Debian versus something else, Linux Mint, and on top of that, deploy your applications. Well, you can't do that with just Ansible. Remember, we have those prereqs, but you can do it with two other tools called Packer and Terraform, and it's super cool. These are both by HashiCorp, which is an awesome DevOps-based company. They build a lot of cool tools. Some of you may have heard of these. Some of you may be using them. And if you want to learn more about this, I'm giving a talk at the next DevOps meetup, which is here at 11:30 next Friday, the 20th, using Ansible a little bit more than we did today, but also combining it with Terraform and Packer. So you can see how, from the ground up, we're going to spin up a DigitalOcean droplet. We're going to actually we're going to build a snapshot droplet, which has got the operating system and everything, and we're going to deploy it all with just the command line. And again, we're going to be using Ansible to configure the whole thing. We're going to deploy a whole website. It's going to be fun, all live. So this is where I think the real magic happens. But this was just a teaser for if you want to get into Ansible. It's a super powerful tool, and I've enjoyed using it a lot. So that's all I got. Feel free to ask me questions after all this.